everyone. I am Luciana Cardi from Osaka University, and I am the co-editor of the volume Re-Orienting the Fairy Tale, Contemporary Adaptations Across Cultures. In this volume, Mayako Murai, myself, and a group of international scholars discuss new perspectives to disorient the cultural hegemonies at the basis of fairy tale studies and reorient this field in a globalized world where Western and non-Western cultures interact. In this project, which started here in Japan 3 years ago, we aimed at reorienting the fairy tale studies by proposing alternative approaches from culturally marginalized perspectives. And we work at the intersection of several study areas, including anime and manga studies, ecofeminism, performance studies, age studies, and children's studies. We hope that you will take part in the ongoing debate and in this project on reorienting the fairy tale studies. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. My name is Mayako Murai, and I'm co-editor of Re-Orienting the Fairy Tale, Contemporary Adaptations Across Cultures. This book grew out of the conference of the same title, which Luciana Cardi and I organized 3 years ago in Japan, and that's where I'm speaking to you now. At the conference, about 50 people, including all the contributors from various countries, gathered and discussed the question of how to reorient the fairy tale in order to open up the field for more culturally and methodologically diverse approaches. I first started to think about this reorienting project 6 years ago, when I was writing the epilogue for my previous book, From Dog Bridegroom to Wolf Girl, Contemporary Japanese Fairy Tale Adaptations in Conversation with the West, also published by Wayne State University Press. To follow up on this cross-cultural conversation, I felt the need to work with researchers with different backgrounds who are also interested in what is happening in fairy tale cultures today. I hope you enjoy the fruit of our collaboration and also join our ongoing conversation. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Natsumi Ikoma. I'm the author of the chapter entitled Monstrous Marionette, The Tale of a Japanese Doll by Angela Carter. Let me briefly introduce the content of my chapter. Angela Carter is a British author, famous for magic realism and her collection of fairy tale adaptations, The Bloody Chamber, among other things. Though she has usually been associated with European literature and Western feminist thoughts, the less known fact is that she spent more than 2 years in Japan, in which time she read many Japanese tales and history books and mixed with the Japanese people. And so a significant part of her literary imagination has been founded in Japan. Taking the example of a short story entitled The Loves of Lady Purple, my chapter demonstrates that not only Western tales of doll women, such as Pygmalion statue and Olympia in The Sandman, but Japanese doll women, such as those found in kabuki and bunraku plays, and the tale of Genji, and the Kawabata stories, also contributed to the genesis of the story. Cross-culturally informed reading of Carter's tales will, I hope, surface some of the less obvious metaphors in her stories and bring about a more exciting reading experience suitable for fairy tale adaptations in a globalized world. I hope you enjoy reading my chapter. Happy reading!
My name is Shuli Barzilai, and I'm the author of Modern Theory Meets Three Little Pigs in the Classroom. In order to explain how I came to write this essay and how I came to teach a course on modern theory via the tale of the Three Little Pigs, I'll read to you some sentences from my opening paragraph. The first class of my compulsory course on modern literary theory was a non-encounter. The mainly silent students whose body language expressed boredom, dis-ease, or anxiety sat opposite the screen I filled with abstract concepts. For several days before our next meeting, I worried the problem: how to captivate my captive audience, how to generate interest in a reputedly bone-dry yet demanding subject. So I tried another stratagem, and it assumed a fairy tale form in two senses. First, drawing on adaptations of the tale type designated Blowing the House In, ATU 124, I used the tale to explicate varied theoretical approaches. Second, happily, the conjunction of quote-unquote highbrow theory with quote-unquote lowbrow texts not only diffused initial apprehensions and biases, but also facilitated lively classroom discussions. This combination had an unexpected additional advantage, a bonus, if you will. Through encounters with an endearing and enduring tale about three anthropomorphic pigs, students increasingly grasped the relevance of its multiple adaptations and reorientations for understanding contemporary sociocultural trends and issues. Thus, the odd coupling of modern critical theory with the Three Little Pigs evolved into an ongoing discussion in the permutations of cultural criticism. I hope you enjoyed the essay. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Aleksandra Szugajew, and I am a doctoral candidate at the University of Warsaw and one of the contributors to this book right here, Re-Orienting the Fairy Tale, Contemporary Adaptations Across Cultures, edited by Mayako Murai and Luciana Cardi, published by Wayne State University Press. My chapter, titled Adults Reclaiming Fairy Tales for Cinema, concerns the current trend, you could say, of fairy tale movie adaptations that are primarily directed at an adult audience, using examples such as Snow White and the Huntsman or Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. I discuss two strategies that Hollywood adopts in its productions. So these are mainly Western big movie productions that I discuss in my chapter, in order to make movie adaptations of classic Western fairy tales more appealing to an adult audience. The appeals I discuss, I call the origin appeal and the darkness appeal. If you would like to find out more, then I invite you to read my chapter.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Jolson, and I'm speaking to you from Belgium. It was my pleasure to contribute a chapter to this book, or should it be upside down and say this book. And my chapter deals with the topic of age in fairy tale rewritings. Now, we know that in the late 20th century and early 21st century, many authors and illustrators revised fairy tales with regards to their gender, sexuality, race, and class aspects. Behind me, for example, is a picture by the Flemish illustrator Isabel van den Abele, where you can see that she has cast Little Red Riding Hood in quite a different role than the brothers Grimm and Charles Perrault. In my chapter, I asked the question whether fairy tale rewritings also exploit this critical potential when it comes to age roles. And I start this chapter by an observation by age critic Sylvia Henneberg, who is quite critical of traditional fairy tales and says that they teach children not only sexism but also ageism. I then look at the role that age has played so far in fairy tale criticism, and then examine fairy tale rewritings to see if they also exploit their critical potential when it comes to age. I hope that you enjoy reading this chapter, as well as, of course, the rest of this book. Bye!
My chapter tries to synthesize the analysis of contemporary fairy tale films with approaches rooted in a transdisciplinary field one can subsume as childhood studies. From this perspective, it can be analyzed how different images of children and childhood are constructed and represented in different cultural texts, also logically fairy tales, and how these images can be likewise critically considered and thus deconstructed. The theoretical stance I take in this chapter follows the claims of the so-called material turn in childhood studies, thereby acknowledging the corporal reality of children, aside of being only effigies for adult inscriptions. In this regard, the chapter compares three traditional fairy tale texts, namely Pinocchio, Hansel and Gretel, as well as The Little Match Girl, and juxtaposes its portrayals of childhood with contemporary cinematic fairy tale adaptations, that is, Steven Spielberg's AI, Kim Il-sung's South Korean adaptation of Hansel and Gretel, as well as Ukrainian director Kira Muratova's Melody of Street Organ. The main recurring pattern in my analysis is the comparison how different aesthetic strategies applied in the films, which display the child actors' bodies in quite transgressive ways, serve to critically subvert the normative and often Eurocentrist views on childhood described in the traditional texts, such as vulnerability and complete dependence on adults.
Konnichiwa everyone, I'm Katsuhiko Suganuma, one of the contributors to the new edited volume, Re-Orienting the Fairy Tale. I believe everyone has a favorite song, the song that you cherish dearly, whether it be the song that you grew up with singing or the song that lifts your spirit up when you feel down. Like any other fairy tales of yours, I think music could also be an important cultural text through which we can cultivate our imagination. Therefore, my chapter looks at the critical intersection of fairy tale studies and popular music studies. Taking a semi-autobiographical approach, I focus on the case study of this Japanese girls band called Princess, who are enormously popular and commercially successful in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Growing up, being confused about my sexuality and gender, especially all those teenage years, I found the music of Princess quite informative and encouraging of who I was. Therefore, the music of Princess was a fairy tale for me to find my own place in the undeniably heteronormative world. So with this chapter of mine, I hope I could contribute to the process of reorienting fairy tale studies in mainly two ways. One is to incorporate the significance of music in our discussions, and the other is to queer our interpretation of fairy tales. So I hope that the readers of my chapter would find their own way of appreciating your favorite song, and then use that musical space to come to terms with whom you really are, and then imagine whom you could possibly become in a world full of the pressures for you to do otherwise. So I hope you would enjoy reading my chapter. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Daniela Kato, and I wrote what became the final chapter of this book, and which I titled The Plantation, the Garden and the Forest, Biocultural Borderlands in Angela Carter's Penetrating to the Heart of the Forest. My chapter involves a journey reflecting the very initial journey that brought me to the fairy tale. Fairy tales have long cast the spell of the sensuous on me, an expression coined by critic David Abram in his book on the ecology of animism. And fairy tales are indeed sensuous worlds teeming with animate, morphing life forms and forces that charge them with currents of energy. And these energy exchanges confound and defy all sorts of boundaries, including those between human and non-human. However, as a scholar, I can no longer be naively seduced by these animate worlds, because I've come to realize that they often configure highly asymmetrical and thus problematic encounters between species and genders. So in the first part of my journey, I recruit a number of travel companions to help me understand the nature of these encounters. From Anna Tsing, Donna Haraway and other multi-species scholars, I learned the concept of biocultural borderlands as places where species meet, a powerful concept that compels us to rethink the entanglements of species and genders that weave together the worlds we inhabit and that are imaginatively represented in fairy tales. And from them too, I learned that these entanglements have often crystallized around highly ecopolitically charged places like colonial plantations, botanical gardens, enchanted forests, whose underlying narratives are based on hierarchical ideals of domination and domestication of humans, animals, plants, and other living beings. In the second part of my journey, I invite in Angela Carter as a travel companion. Due to its compelling narrative arc, her modern fairy tale, penetrating to the heart of the forest, allows me to ground the previous conjectures and engage in a non-symptomatic interpretation that disorients previous suspicious readings. Thus, instead of plunging into its depths, I glide over the surface of the text and bring along various non-Eurocentric anthropological perspectives that shine a light on the journey of ecological recuperation on which the text takes us. And this journey through the plantation, the garden and the forest compels us to consider the different modes of interspecies entanglement that each of them entails, and ultimately their significance for reimagining less damaging forms of living through the power of enchantment. I hope that readers too join in as travel companions and surrender to the pleasure, hopefulness and enchantment of Angela Carter's fairy tale. Thank you.